Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Wednesday, the 7th of February, comes to you from Dusseldorf in Germany. I'm here for the eWorld Energy Conference in Essen today, seeing quite a lot of clients. But let's start by looking just quickly at the dollar index. The dollar is rising on the short-term chart. We've got some good upside targets here, so we are just seeing an improvement. We still do have these long-term downside targets hanging over us, but the dollar is looking better short-term than it has for a while. This is the sort of recovery we were seeing several weeks ago, but we're a long way below the cloud on the medium and long-term charts, but looking better on that short-term chart. Taking a look at the euro, that means euro dollar is looking bearish on that dollar weakness. We've got a downside target to 121, which would be 2.5% downside. So euro looking strong medium and long term, conversely is the dollar, but actually looking a bit weaker short term. Dollar has been struggling against the yen lately, trying to recover here through the cloud, but yen strength has shown through with the market turmoil we've seen in recent days, yen tending to be a safe haven. Sterling falling lower, we've got downside targets to 137 and 133, so we are seeing just a downside push against the dollar there. A reversal longer term, we're seeing that showing through in these charts, but short term, sterling looking weaker. We're also seeing that with sterling and GBP. We're seeing that with the euro, sterling also pushing lower. So sterling is just struggling generally, and against the Swiss franc. Against the Australian dollar, it's fairly flat. So we're seeing some Australian dollar weakness creeping in there. Bitcoin is on a knife edge at the moment, really. We are just on the cloud support here on the lagging line on the medium term chart. On the short term chart, we're just trying to break through this key level of resistance. 8,000 seems to be resistance and 6,000 seems to be support for Bitcoin. It's that simple. If we can go above 8,000 now, that would take us into bullish territory. A fall below 6,000 would be bearish. So just got to keep an eye out. We do have new upside targets on Bitcoin of some 23-24% upside potential, but those targets are not yet activated. We need to move higher in order to activate those targets, so it will be very interesting to watch in the coming days. US market last night was up. We found support on the cloud there with the S&P 500. The Nasdaq also finding some support, and the Dow also just breathing a sigh of relief. The cloud's showing very good support levels for the US markets. We are still, of course, bearish below the cloud. We've got upside targets now activated here on the short term on the Dow. The Nasdaq, similarly, we've got upside targets. The Russell 2000 index still looking pretty bearish, but again finding support around the cloud. So we are just seeing the market bouncing at these levels. But having said that, the futures are down 1% this morning. The S&P future down 1%. So we are still bearish here short term. Still on cloud support. And the Nasdaq E-mini also hitting cloud resistance here, although we found cloud support on the medium term. So interestingly, we do have some upside targets here. Interestingly, we are just seeing the US markets set to open lower. We're ahead of the UK opening at the moment this morning, but a 2.64 downside yesterday percent. FTSE looking very bearish indeed, finding support around the 7,100 level. And the long-term chart now really testing cloud support. So the UK market looking pretty dire, and the mid caps, the FTSE 250, also looking very worrying. New downside targets here of potentially 13%. And on FTSE we don't have a downside target yet activated here, but these thrusts down will produce downside potential targets. The DAX also below the cloud on the medium-term chart, bearish. We've got a downside target of, we did tweet this yesterday. Remember, we're tweeting directly from the updated charts here. Follow me on Twitter at @chartstoday.com. You can actually just see all my tweets there, so do keep up. And here we're seeing that the DAX did activate a downside target, some 11% lower on that short-term chart, so still quite worrying signs there. The Nikkei closed fairly unchanged overnight this morning. We're seeing here above the cloud just on the lagging line, but again the short-term chart not looking great. The Hang Seng having retraced a lot of its step, only closed down 1/3%, and the local market in China was down quite significantly, down 1.67%, taking us to a bearish place on the medium-term chart, so not looking great. Downside targets here on the short term of 1% and 4.75%. So Asian equities really taking flight with the US meltdown as well. We're seeing the Sensex also lower below the cloud, having found cloud support here on the daily chart yesterday. We're seeing we had a slight close down overnight, and the Australian market really hammered yesterday. Today has actually recovered a little bit, up 0.75%. Brent crude is still looking lower. We're below the cloud on the short term. We've got 3 downside targets. That gives us some conviction that we will go lower on those targets. We are still bullish medium and long term, but short term we're just struggling below the cloud. WTI, similar picture, multiple downside targets, bearish below the cloud. US nat gas sitting at $2.76, and we are with downside targets and bearish below the cloud. So the spike we saw in the last few weeks really pushed right the way back. Copper just struggling to get back into bullish territory, and if we look at gold, surprisingly gold through all this turmoil has fallen as well. We do have a downside target here of 12.94, but we do have upside targets too. And if we look at silver, similar picture, looking bearish short term below the cloud. US Treasury yield sitting at 2.76%, just struggling to get back into bullish territory short term, although we do have 2.96 as a short term target. Of course, 3.1% as the medium to long term target. So Treasury yields look set to go higher. Apple still struggling to get back above the cloud on the medium and short term, so looking more bearish than most tech. Google also looking bearish short term, medium term holding on to its bullish position. Amazon has held on to its bullish position on all 3 time frames, and Facebook just finding support there. That trend is still pretty much above the cloud, but it's not the steepest of trends. And Microsoft also holding on to its bullish trend. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.